Good morning. Good morning. Fantastic. It's great not being the first session of the day because they haven't had their coffee, but you've had coffee now. You've had sessions, and we have more. But we understand that we are it between them and lunch.
We got you.
Yeah, so it better be good or you will be lunch.
That's right. So welcome to ALM the Database. I'm Brian Randell. This is?
I'm Alex Yates. Nice to meet you guys.
And we're definitely not Hans and Franz, but we could probably play that out. If you've seen Saturday Night Live, you know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, let's just get right into it. Who are you? Why would they want to talk to you?
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a pre-sales engineer at Redgate. It's my job to make sure we keep our promises. My job is to help people actually implement continuous delivery solutions for their database, DLM solutions in the real world. I've been doing it for about 5 years now with Redgate, and actually I can see a lot of faces around the room of people that I've actually helped, so it's nice to see you guys still coming to my sessions. I've obviously not offended you too badly. I've been working with teams in all different industry sectors, large teams, small teams, on every continent except Antarctica so far. So if you do know anyone, I'm really keen to take that one off. So that's who I am. I've been implementing the DLM stuff for a while, but Brian, who are you?
Well, I am a consultant. I work for a small partnership in the United States focused on Microsoft tools and technologies. I got started in software way too long ago on HP 3000 mini computers doing COBOL and RPG with a turbo image. And so I grew up thinking that an application without a database really isn't an app I want to work on. So moving to Windows, fell in love with SQL Server, using interfaces like Starfighter in the day, if anyone remembers that. And over the years, I've gotten heavily involved in helping teams take control over their development processes, so helping them be more agile. And one of my passions is helping them be more agile with things like Scrum, but also bring it to the teams that have to manage and work with databases. Because fundamentally, databases are a different beast. That said, a lot of the core principles and things we do for core application development, so C#, Java, etc., can be applied when you have the right people with good processes, and tools can really help you. So what we're going to talk about is how ALM, DLM, and DevOps all fit into the process and show you how you can create a continuous delivery release pipeline. So when we think about what ALM is, it's an industry standard term about thinking about software from creation, from that idea phase, to when it ultimately is moved through a life cycle over months, years, decades, to where it eventually is put to pasture. It's out, it's dead, it's no longer available. For a lot of us as developers and DBAs working in application software, whether it be for your internal organization or for possibly customers that you sell to, you've often probably focused on development, right? This core area of writing code, store procedures, designing databases, and then shipping them out. And then if you're a DBA on the operations side, you're concerned about making sure the database is available, it's functioning well, data doesn't get corrupted, etc. ALM takes that into account as well as something we call governance. And governance is all the stuff that most of us probably don't want to deal with, right? Now my guess is most of you like getting paid. Anybody? Yes, fantastic, right? I love free and open source software, but at the end of the day, my banker does not. My banker wants money. And so governance is all about the stuff that makes sure we get paid, that we have the finances and hopefully the resources necessary to deliver on what we're building. A key point of governance is that for some organizations, software is the product. It is what you do. Other organizations, software is a part of a larger component. My canonical example is the airline industry. We have two major players, Airbus and Boeing. Both of them build amazing aircrafts. Both major aircrafts, for example, we take the Dreamliner from Boeing and the A380 from Airbus, are amazing machines. They would not work without software, right? So both companies have large-scale project management teams running those projects to deliver those aircraft. Yet software is a key part of that. So when we think about the big picture, governance helps us manage software in the large when that's the only thing, but also in the small when it's part of a larger area. Now the thing about ALM is that it tends to have this bit of bias towards development for code. But what about the database, right? It turns out that, once again, these core principles that we have for software development apply to database development and management. So whether it's simply making sure we have the right process around manual changes or taking that next big step to source control of our database, schema, and possibly our core static data, continuous integration where we can take changes, put them into some kind of automated build process, do some validation, some testing to make sure we haven't screwed things up, we haven't run our dependency tree, to the point of actually getting it out into multiple environments, whether it be dev, test, user acceptance, pre-prod, and ultimately production. We need to be able to have a release pipeline where we know why it was moved from stage to stage, who approved it, and what version is it. And ultimately, we need to have an end-to-end monitoring experience where we can get continuous feedback on, did we do the right thing for the application? Did we do the right thing for our users? And is it still highly functional? So all these things are critical, and this is what Redgate coined the term DLM, Database Lifecycle Management. Right? We want to take the rigor and process that we've brought to core software development and extend it to the database, because databases have a few special needs. And if we go back to my opening statement about how, to me, an application without a database isn't an application, databases, particularly relational databases like SQL Server, Oracle, etc., often are the foundation of multiple systems, and if the database fails, the company fails. So it's critical we have the tools and technologies around this with the right people to take care of that. Which brings us to this thing called DevOps. And DevOps is interesting because we like to say where we spent the last 10 years getting agile, the next 10 years are going to be focused around bringing DevOps to bear. The idea here with DevOps is that we want to reduce the friction between making changes to applications and databases and actually getting them into production. One of the fundamental problems that companies face is their inability to be agile because their teams cannot respond to the business's needs more effectively. Right? Many of you, I'm sure, work in an organization that maybe has used SQL Server for a year, and you've run into a subtle problem where you find new applications popping up on top of certain database products that we don't like to say out loud many times because it sounds like a dirty word. But how about Microsoft Access? Anybody run into that problem where, let's just call them our users. We won't call them dirty names. And because core IT, the core software development team, cannot deliver fast enough, cannot give what they want, they go outside, they go rogue. And they start building these systems to where next thing you know, this desktop database is now a line of business application that if it fails, the business has trouble. So what we want to do is make sure that we can deliver in a structured format and keep people from going to Access and, God forbid, SharePoint to build their data solutions. Okay? And no offense if you like SharePoint, we haven't got along. I had a date with it and it just didn't work out. So, in either case, the key thing with DevOps and what it means is that we're all about reducing friction. We're not trying to put people out of a job, right? If you're worried about losing your job because of automation, you're not doing a good job. If you are a button clicker, right? If you do management through tons of GUIs and you can't see beyond, right? If you can't deliver value, yes, you'll be out of a job, right? But proper DevOps means you are doing the important part. You're being the human. You're providing the brain, the judgment, right? That's why a DBA is totally worth their salt, is when they can look at a change script and catch the fact that, hey, something isn't right. They can monitor performance indexes and notice they should be seeing a spike of performance load at a certain time of the day. There's all these different things that humans do really well, right? That's how you stay employed, is delivering value that way. It's not by being afraid of tools, being afraid of automation, and being afraid of the fact that we're going to break down walls and we're not going to have you manually deploy against 20 environments every week, because we can't do that. We have to be more efficient. So when I think about DevOps and I think about databases and ALMs, I think of a simple word, a word that starts with the letter C. That word is continuous, right? We're going to be totally looking at how we can focus on the flow and go from a change, a new object, a new entity, and get it all the way into production. So it starts with continuous integration. Now, hopefully in 2015, this is something I don't have to explain, but we find, sadly, sometimes we still do. At its simplest point, what we're trying to do is say a person, a developer, is working on something, maybe some C# source code, maybe some JavaScript, maybe modifying a stored procedure. That change they make can be something that other people depend on for their part of the application to work. And the canonical problem we've run into years ago was that developers would work in isolation on their changes, right? And we see this a lot with database developers. They're over here working on database changes, and you got the people working on the UI, the front end, and then at some point they decide to get together and talk and say, oh yeah, I just made a bunch of schema changes. And what does the app developer do? They freak out. They're like, you're going to break everything. Oh yeah, well no problem, we'll work about it next week. And so you spend the whole next week doing integration, bringing the changes together and dealing with it. Continuous integration says, when I have finished a change and I know it looks good, I will put it into source control, and that will then cause a build to occur. And that build will do a number of things. Number one, if it has objects that can be compiled, they'll be validated, right? What will we do with database schema, right? We do things like check dependency trees, right? We do everything is check for syntactical errors. Has anybody ever left off a comma, right? Right, those little things when you're in a rush, right? And so what we want to do is validate as soon as possible to determine if we've got any problems. And then we want to make that change available to the rest of our team as soon as possible so they can pick it up when they're ready. Now, this is where you go, okay, well, how am I going to do this, Brian? And this is where we start thinking about, well, we need the right process, but we need some tools. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, this is where Redgate can start helping us from the beginning. Yeah,
absolutely. And in the keynote this morning, you all saw
Steve?
Steve and the rest of the guys up there. You all
people he works with.
You all saw them commit to source control, an automated build happen, and a deployment through Octopus Deploy. But what you didn't see is what Redgate tools were actually working under the hood. And that's what we're going to show you today. We're going to show exactly how they work and what they do. So we have this thing called the DLM automation suite, which is the automatable part of the code, the SQL compare engine effectively. And we've got a couple of interfaces to it. We've got a command line tool called SQL CI. And this is going to be called by some tool that's going to automate that trigger. In the case of the demo this morning, it was TeamCity. Today, we'll be using the Microsoft stack. We'll be using TFS build in the new version. But the SQL CI command line, what it does at its core root is it will allow you to build your database. We're going to create a database for you. We're going to take that source code that you've put into Redgate SQL source control, which I hope you're all using. You're going to take that source code and we're going to compile it. And what does that mean? I'll show you in a demo a little bit later, a little bit more precisely exactly how it does that. But this is one command call that you can call to SQL CI build to do that task. The whole idea is that traditional source control, CI tools, release management tools, they are great at handling your C# code. They're not that good at handling databases out of the box. And that's where you're going to use the Redgate tools to help.
So then there's this T word, the testing thing. Now, fundamentally, organizations over the years have said, yes, testing is important enough to have separate departments for it. But what we're finding when you start thinking about continuous testing is that you have to bring that closer to the people making changes to the objects. And one of the ways we do this is by putting more responsibility on the creators of the thing that needs to be tested, right? The subject under test, and not further away in separate departments, right? Because we want this more agile delivery process, right? In Scrum, one of the tenets is that everybody is a developer, right? You may have specialized focuses. You might be the person that's the T-SQL expert. You might be the person who's the UX expert. But fundamentally, you all have the same job, which is delivering the solution. And so what we want to do is have continuous testing happening as we're developing. And that's why when you have the appropriate tools that can do automated testing, you can get more value. What we found over time and again is that humans are bad at repetitive tasks, right? Microsoft found in the early 2000s with Visual Studio 2003 that more than 70% of the bugs that were reported against the product were found in code that had been code reviewed. Think about that for a second, right? They're using code reviews to hopefully increase quality, yet 70% of the time they found bugs in code that had been reviewed. It's not that we're saying we shouldn't do code reviews, it's got to be one of the tools in our toolbox. And so we need to be continuously looking at how we can solve problems, and one of the ways we do that is with unit tests. Unit tests are a great way that we can solve complexity and understand dependencies in our code, and actually it's a form of documentation, and it works great for source code, but it turns out you can do it with your database objects also, right? Turns out the open source community and Redgate has ways to help you.
Absolutely. Who here has a legacy database? Okay. Who has stored procedures in it? Who writes unit tests? Who changes an object over here and something over there broke and you weren't really expecting it, and maybe you didn't spot that until it was in production and like the world's on fire now? Sound familiar? A lot of people? Well, this is a solved problem, okay? There is no excuse. In C#, in Java, people write unit tests. They write a small, quick, automatable piece of code that will test, does that piece of code work? Okay? If they're particularly breaky, fragile bits of your system, if they're particularly important parts of your system, you should think about writing unit tests for that. This is such an important thing to so many people that there are open source unit test frameworks for SQL Server that are out there. Just no one uses them. And I don't know why. One of the open source unit test frameworks that's out there is really, really good, is a tool called T-SQL-T. And Redgate was actually approached by Dennis and Sebastian, who wrote it at a trade show a few years ago. And they said, we've built this really, really cool backend, this unit testing backend, this framework for unit testing your stored procedures and various other objects. It doesn't have a nice UI, a nice front end. Redgate, will you build one for us? Because you know what? You have a big reach in the SQL Server community. You're good at building plugins into Management Studio. You're good at building UIs. You're good at making stuff just easy and useful. So we did. We went into partnership with this open source project, T-SQL-T. SQL Test, the nice UI, the nice plugin on the front of it, and the T-SQL-T unit testing framework behind it are a really, really good solution for unit testing your stored procedures and your functions. If you want to, we're not going to go do a demo of that today because you know what, we're trying to demo an entire DLM solution in 1 hour. But we do have a hands-on lab, so you should, if you're interested in unit testing, go to the hands-on lab area, give yourself 10 or 15 minutes, take the card for SQL test, and there are some examples there that you can work through and understand how it works. But we don't just provide a unit testing framework. The unit testing framework does add some objects to your database. You want your unit tests in your dev environment, certainly. Do you want them in your test environment? Maybe, it depends how you use it. You don't want them in production. So it becomes a deployment pain. I want to be able to deploy my changes, but I want to filter out T-SQL-T. Well, we've got a fix for that too. SQL Compare has an option, ignore the T-SQL-T unit test framework and all of the associated tests. It's one button, and you can save a project so you don't make the mistake and forget to tick that flag in the future. And you know what? Automation's really good at helping you to remember to tick all those boxes correctly each time you do a deployment. And finally, the SQL CI tool that I mentioned before, there's a specific task in there for running unit tests. You can parallelize them. If you have a bunch of unit tests that take 6 hours to run, fine. Parallelize them across 18 different machines. You'll get your results in 20 minutes. And the integration that we've built with SQL CI allows you to do that. It allows you to run different test runs on different schedules. You can get your fast running tests every time you commit. And those tests that just take 8 hours to run, you can run them overnight.
Now, another issue we have in the focus on this flow of continuous delivery is continuous deployment, right? I've made the change, I've got it being built and validated and automated tests running against it. But now I've got to get in the appropriate environments so it's there to be tested in the large with the rest of my application, right? Maybe for the developers, maybe for dedicated testers, maybe it's for my users doing user acceptance testing where they're checking to make sure that they got everything they asked for. This is where they need the new UI, the new middle tier, and yes, the new backend. And what we want to do is reduce that cycle time. We want to reduce the friction of getting things from the developer's hands and into the user's hands, whichever stage that's at. And thus, we want to have some mechanism that allows us to take our changes and move them into an environment that is appropriate for the database and the application code that works with it. And this is where really automated tools are essential if you want to move to that next step of automation. And once again, this is what we're really going to focus on in the talk is SQL Release. Yeah, SQL Release is our plugin to release management tools like Octopus Deploy. Again, in the keynote, you saw my colleagues pressing buttons and promoting with Octopus Deploy, but we didn't show you how we'd achieved that. Well, what we did is we plugged in to SQL Release, and I'm going to show you about that in a minute as well. When we're doing deployments with SQL Server, and this is the key thing about why handling your database deployments is hard, there's data. You can't just delete the old version and put the new version there like you can with C#. There's data. You delete the old version of the database and put the new version there, you've lost your data. So you need to think both about how you want the database to look and how you're going to change it. There are these two separate moving parts, and there's an important relationship between them. This is where traditional release management tools fall down because they don't have built-in support for that. That's what SQL Release offers as well. And I guess my message around automated deployment, because I know there are probably, how many DBAs in the room? How many developers in the room? Shall I sit you on different sides so we can kind of start a war? I know that a lot of traditional DBAs are scared of automation. They're scared of it because they're afraid that I don't just make the mistake once, I've accidentally automated it out to all of my systems. They're scared because they don't trust computers. Well, there are two important parts to that.
Humans are good at certain things and computers are good at certain things, right? Humans are good at making decisions based on experience, knowledge, being battle-worn, understanding that if I do this thing, it tends to break. You can make decisions based on intuition, knowledge, and understanding. That doesn't include, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, I've got a checklist of 15 different things I need to do to handle this deployment properly while I'm dosed off on caffeine, and you know what, if I mess it up, I'm fired. That is not a scenario where humans perform well. You know what is a good tool for handling a checklist of things that have to happen in a certain order in a particular, reliable, repeatable way? Computers. That's what we invented them for, to do stuff like that. Okay? So there is no excuse in this day and age to be manually opening up Management Studio and executing your deployment script manually. Because you know what? You wouldn't be the first person to accidentally run it against the wrong server. Okay? Anyone else done that? Yeah? That's scary. Okay? We want to have an automated process to handle the way the changes are actually going to be executed. And that's what SQL Release does.
And then we have this need for continuous feedback. We finally get it into the environment. How do we know what's going on? And this happens at multiple layers when we think about ALM and we talk about getting feedback from users, whether it be one-on-one through feedback tools or through the fact that they just use the tool and we get metrics. So what we need is tools to help us gather that feedback whenever possible. Because it's not always what people say, it's what they do that speaks the truth. And so we need tools that can monitor our databases in production, know that they're working well, but also to understand where things are in that overall pipeline. Right, what changes were made in dev and how's it going to affect the various environments and ultimately production. Nothing worse than a developer says they made the change and the user is expected to find it and then oops, you found out it didn't make it. Right? And so being able to figure out where that's happening and before it actually gets into production is critical. And once again, I think Redgate, we got 2 tools here that can really help people. One's free and then we also have a production tool.
Yeah, so there are 2 things that we want to think about here. First of all is the way that we make our changes. Brilliant. You know what? I've made a plan. I've implemented this source control solution and I've sent a 50-page document to all my developers to tell them the process that they now have to follow. Has that ever gone well for anyone? Tends not to work that well sometimes. When we implement a solution, we need to make sure it's practical, but we also need to know if people are cutting corners and not following the rules, because that happens sometimes. And you know what? We can do an awful lot of stuff to revoke access from basically anything beyond your dev environment. The devs don't need access to it, write access to it. But we need to know, is anybody making that hot fix on production? Okay? We've all been there. The business is losing $1 squillion a second, and I can follow the normal route, but my cycle time, the amount of time it takes to go from idea to production, my cycle time is measured in weeks and not minutes, because I've got to go through 15 bureaucratic processes to actually get there. In the meantime, the business is losing $1 squillion a second. What am I going to do? I'm going to just do it on production and email the developers to let them know. Right? That happens a fair amount. When that happens, often you don't get the email. Humans aren't very good at sending messages. We have a tool called DLM Dashboard, which you saw earlier on, which we will use, which we will be tracking in real time and telling you every single change. You will get a history of every single change that has actually happened to your database. You will see the user that executed it, the exact script that was executed, the time it was executed, and also the tool they used to execute it. Did they do it in Management Studio? Did they use Redgate SQL Compare? Did you use SQL Release? So you've got all of this wealth of information. And you know what? When it comes to auditing and compliance, does the auditor want to know what you intended to do and the process that you put together, or do they want to know what actually happened? DLM Dashboard is a really good tool for telling you what has happened, when it has happened, and then you can think about how you're going to deal with the fact that this thing happened, how you can bring it back into your process. It's the essential glue that is missed a lot of the time, and that's when processes fall over. We have another tool as well, though, so it's not just about managing your process, it's also about looking out and being aware if production is on fire. If you've ever been to a talk by Steve Jones about monitoring, you'll know this is something he cares an awful lot about. I went to, I think it was a SQL in the City keynote a couple of years ago in London. He was talking about how everything is out there to get you, right? Even the squirrels are out to get you because they bite through power lines and they corrupt your database. Was anybody here to see that talk? Yeah, that was a really good talk. So we want to know if there's a fire on production. We want to know about it before our boss does so that we can fix it. We want to know about it before it becomes a problem in the first place, if we can see a particular metric is heading in an uncomfortable direction so that we can fix it before it's a problem. So now we're taking care of not just the process of making the changes, but also looking after our code in production.
So if we take all this together, it's ultimately focused on a simple thing of continuous improvement. We want to start at point A and continue to go on a journey, right? This is not a destination. You don't suddenly buy DevOps. You don't suddenly have agile processes. It's something you evolve over time. Microsoft, for example, has gotten the religion. With Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server, they now release full product about every year, and they release updates every quarter. Online with Visual Studio Online, they release every 3 weeks. So for a company to go from a release cycle every 2.5 years on average for their tooling to get down to where they can ship every 3 weeks on a regular cadence means they made changes. One of the things they start with is they start with Scrum for agile development. But now teams have evolved and they're doing some more lean practices, and they're evolving how they do it. So you have to understand that as we talk about this, you might not have any of this today, or you might just be using source control. That's great. It's a continuous process of finding new ways to do it and to improve. And ultimately, this leads us to what we call continuous value delivery, right? Continuous delivery is the big picture. It's that end-to-end story of taking ideas to production and closing that feedback loop, right? Reducing cycle time and focusing on the flow. The whole point of value delivery is that we are doing things for our users, not just to make us look better, but to make the business better, right? Unless you're a company like Redgate who builds software tools, that's not your focus. Your company doesn't care if you use C#. They don't care if you use SQL Server. Really, they don't, right? What they care is that when they turn on their devices, magic happens, right? And they get to their apps, right? You know, if you take your mobile phone, right, it's a magical device, right? Well, that magical device is uninteresting when it doesn't work, right? When there's no power, I don't care. It's just basically a modified brick, all right? Your software solution, they don't care what it's built on. What they care about, that it delivers what they need, all right? That you are providing the banking software, the real estate software, or the customer management software that they need to make the business successful. So it's up to us to make sure we have our act together to help the business be as successful as possible. Now, we've talked about how Redgate helps with these different tools, but one of the key things that I want to point out, and this is what I love, because as a non-Redgate person, I'm not an employee, right? Why do I like their tools? Because they work in my environment, right? They understand the tools that I want to use, which happens to be Microsoft's tool stack, and I want to have it help me get my solutions out the door. But the great thing you've already heard Alex mention a couple of times is that Renegade Tools work with things like TeamCity, with Octopus Deploy. In fact, it's a funny thing we're going to see in a bit that even Microsoft has gotten this religion about saying, hey, maybe we want to be more friendly. So understand that all the different tools we talked about, you don't necessarily have to use them all. Right? Now, granted, Redgate's kind of got the market pretty cornered on some of the best tools out there. Just understand that they're meant to work in your environment the way you work. So your process, your tools together with Redgate can help you make this happen. Right? Just fundamentally, no matter what you do, please don't do it manually, right? That's what we're begging of you. So if you don't get the Redgate tools, use something, right? Now, what are we going to show them? Because I think at this point, they probably have had enough of us blabbing and talking. Let's show them something.
I think so. So what I have is a legacy application, right? And it's actually a legacy demo app. So I'm going to the demo I wanted to do didn't fit neatly into the demo app that we built that was all smoke and mirrors a couple of years ago. So I'm kind of lifting up the skirt on that now, which I actually think is a bit more realistic, right? I've got an app that actually isn't built in a very sensible way, but I still have to manage it. How many of us are in a similar sort of position?
Let me guess, your apps are not totally awesome, right?
So please don't sneer when you look at code and you see bits and pieces around the page about how this has been built, because this was never intended to go to production, right?
But we're professionals. We know what we're doing.
So what we've got is we've got a copy of the SimpleTalk app. And
let's make sure you guys all know what SimpleTalk is. Redgate's free, lovely community resource site. Fantastic.
Yeah. And Brian Randell has written a blog post for it called ALM in the Database. So I need to add that blog post to SimpleTalk, and that's actually held in the database. The blog post is held as a string in the database, and I also need to add a picture because all of our blog posts have a picture by the side of it. So we're going to add your avatar to the application. Now that's actually in the application part of the system rather than the database. Yeah. So
this thing's pretty horrible. This is probably, he keeps looking at me like, yes. How bad are they going to think? Just remember, it's a demoware.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. We did have a conversation a few days ago. It's like, Brian, so I've got this demo ready. Would you take a look at it? I'm not really sure I want to be demoing this, but he said, hey, look, we've all got legacy code.
We've got these apps that we're not proud of, right? And often we inherit them, right? That's the thing. So we can blame it on someone else.
The point is, it looks good. It does the magic thing. So I need to make a change to the database, to some data in the database. I've also got a bug fix I want to implement as well for the schema. And I also have a change to the application code as well. And I want to be able to deploy all of this at the click of a button in a fully automated way. So that's what I'm going to try and do today using a bunch of Microsoft tools, a bunch of Redgate tools. I've got Octopus Deploy in there as well. I've got some, I'm using TFS source control. So I've got a whole bunch of different tools that I'm stitching together to try and achieve this goal.
So why don't you get started up and I'll kind of just lay that foundation then. So what we're using is an on-premises solution. So everything's on one machine. Definitely demoware. And so you see the website here for Simple Talk. And so at the foundation level, we're using T-Foundation Server 2015 that was just released this summer. And we're going to use that for version control. We're specifically using TFVC for version control, but you also could use Git repositories with it. We're then going to use Microsoft's Team Build, and we'll talk about that in more detail. That's going to start our pipeline. So we have source code, continuous integration, and then we're going to go through the process of getting our code into our different environments, and we've chosen to use Octopus Deploy as the deployment engine, leveraging the Renegade tools underneath the foundation. So at the simplest level, right, teams need to track what they're doing, and T-Foundation Server provides a home hub for you to do that. If you haven't taken a look at T-Foundation Server recently, you really should. Microsoft's really done an about face in a lot of different places. One of the factors is that your home hub now can be accessed through a web browser with just HTML and JavaScript. No Silverlight, no ActiveX, God forbid, no Java applets, right? It's all just industry standard. You can use it on your iPad, you can work with your phone, or as you can see just here on any browser. And what that means is that because we have this simple hub, they've also said we want to be cross-platform. They support Git-based repositories also for distributed version control. That means, yes, I can check in code from my Mac using Xcode and have it integrate. And then there's this crazy thing that something happened with Microsoft. They said, you know what? We like these other environments. We like these other languages. Hell, Satya got up on stage and said, I love Linux. And so to make that a reality, they said, well, people build on different platforms. And so the build engine now has an agent that we'll show you in a bit that is cross-platform. And you can build Windows apps, apps on OS X, and yes, Linux. So they support all from this central hub, those different types of build environments. So it doesn't matter what you're building, and definitely, of course, they love SQL Server. We can put it in here. So one of the key things that I like to do as an ALM person, though, is make sure that we're doing things for a reason, right? We talked about compliance, making sure you're not changing production willy-nilly, right? And how DLM Dashboard can help you see that. From a process standpoint, and for traceability and for auditing, and when you have to deal with regulatory rules about who's making changes to production, it's nice to have a reason. And so in TFS, we have the ability to have work items and track what we're doing. And when we go to check those in, we can, and I got to sorry, change glasses, getting old really sucks. Oh, there it is. We can come in and track our work over here. So we have a task board, and what we'll see here is that we've got a couple items here. If you take a look on the left-hand side, you'll see a blue barred item, and that's known as a product backlog item, a requirement, a user wish. And then you see we also have a bug. And so we have, as a new author, I want to write for Simple Talk, right? And because the way our application works, he has to add me to the database as well as put my picture in there. So we've got two tasks related to that here with the yellow bars. And then we see there's also a bug. We found a select star. Yeah, we don't like select star, do we? That's evil. That's wrong. And so we need to implement a fix to remove that. So what we're going to be able to do is track our work here with the task board. And so Alex is going to come over here. I think you're going to start fixing this problem, right? And show them how we can do a little SQL CI and get this into our release pipeline?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what shall I go for first? Well, let's go for the bug first.
Okay. Well, why don't you drag that task into the in progress state? All right. This lets our team know that we're working on this.
Okay. And now I'm going to go into my database. And I know that the particular piece of code is in this particular stored procedure, get contacts. So I'm going to open this up to make the change. And you can see here, this is my code. I'm not particularly happy with this. The other guy did it, not me. Who here uses SQL prompt? Who knows that I can press one button?
Isn't that magic? That's awesome. I did not know that. That was one that I didn't know, and I was like, that's so cool.
There are so many features of SQL prompt that people don't see. They see the IntelliSense, but they don't see all the wealth of features that go beyond that. Again, go to the hands-on lab area, do the SQL prompt lab, and you'll probably learn something about this tool that you didn't know before. So I'm going to make this change. It was like literally to make that bug fix, it was one keystroke. So I'm going to execute that. And now I'm going to go to Redgate SQL Source Control. I'm not going to talk about source control in a huge bunch of detail. There's just been a session on SQL Source Control. Everybody saw it working in the keynote. But I'll just show you this is, instead of linking to Subversion, which we used in the keynote, in this case, we're linking to TFS. So if I go back to TFS and go to the Code tab, you can see here I've got app and a database folder. I've got both my app and my database hold equal importance in source control. Your app should be there as a peer with all of your database should be there as a peer with your application. We have a directory here called state, and within here we have all of the code associated with
so your stored procedures in there and everything?
Yeah, exactly. My stored procedure is here. If we go to get contacts, this is how it looks on my database. Can everybody read that okay, or do you want me to start using Zoom it or something? At the back, can you read that? Yeah? Okay, fine. So this is a current version in source control. I'm going to commit with Redgate SQL Source Control. I've actually already made the fix for the data, so I'm going to commit one at a time.
Yes, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, we had a discussion earlier. He gave me a bit of a hard time for committing them both at the same time. We want...
Make sure you associate with your work item.
Yes, we've got the work item implement fix to remove star. That's work item number 5. Oops, not SQL compare. So let's go hashtag R5. That means I'm resolving work item number 5, capital R. Yep. Hashtag R5. Thanks very much, Brian.
Yeah, so what's going on here, one of the great things about TFS has had from the beginning is this traceability that when you commit something to version control, you can associate it with the reason, the work item. And what Redgate has done is they've added support in their tools to make sure that happens correctly. And what that means is we'll be able to go back to the task, link it to the change set in the database, and then see that in TFS as well as in version control. Did you commit yet?
So this is my comment. Fixing select star and get contacts because bad practice. Always put why you're changing something as opposed to what's changing. I can see in the diff pane what's changed. I want to know why you've changed it because that's going to help me understand why I did that stupid thing last week and made that mistake. What was I thinking? So let's commit that change. That's going to go into TFS. And while we're here, let's also commit the other change, the new blog post, which was work item number 2. So let's go into hashtag R2, adding BR blog post. Let's select it, that would help. And commit this to source control. That change there was just data in the field. SQL source control, I'm not going to go into it in a huge amount of detail. You've probably seen SQL source control, but it has a really cool feature where you can just select particular tables that are reference data, and you can source and control them as first-class objects.
All right, let's go back and show them in TFS real quick that this got in there and that your work is resolved. So let's go to the web.
We'll see it. Oh, yeah, we can see it here.
Right there, this is my work. This is a feature that, by the way, is now in the community edition of 2015. Before this was a more expensive SKU, so anyone can use that. And now, if you do a refresh.
Yeah, we do a refresh here. We'll see the latest version of the code.
There we go. And you click compare. Right in the web browser, you can actually take a look. You don't even have to load up any command line tools. There you go, side-by-side diffing in your web browser.
Now, this is something that Brian showed me yesterday, and I was like, wow. So the source control stuff in TFS is actually quite good, and it's been quite good for a long time. I've had problems with TFS build 2013.
All right, let's just make people a little happy. You stand back for a second,
okay,
right?
Okay,
let's just, you know, he gets going. You like, and don't get me wrong, TeamCity is a great product. There's lots of great tools out there. Now, I just want to review real quick that our work is done. Let's show you this traceability really quick here. If I know how to use a mouse, I don't. It's obvious. There we go. And if we come back to that board, right? Notice those have been brought over here, and if we just open up one, go over here to links, and what we're going to see here is that we have that change set. Right there is change set 16 linked in. If I were to double click, it would take me right back to that source code change. So we got this great traceability end-to-end on why things are done. Now we've got things in version control, we've got SQL source control, but now we want that next step. We want to be able to have that check-in, build, and validate. And you know, Alex, you said you've been a little disappointed in the past with Microsoft's build technology.
I have been converted though with the new stuff that's coming out in 2015.
Right. So with 2015 or Visual Studio Online, they've got Agile Religion and they've got great build tools. If I go to create a new build really quickly, I want you to just take a look at that screen really quick. Sure, I can build with Visual Studio, but yes, that is 2 Xamarin projects, and then yes, that is an Xcode project, right? Microsoft out of the box is providing support for other tool sets. And then it just gets a little more wild and crazy when I go and take a look at a build. So let's pick, how about Simple Talk DB? Is that okay if I go in there?
Yeah, go ahead.
And I'm going to the edit mode. Rather than looking at XAML, which is what the previous generation of the build engine was built upon, we now have a nice step-by-step task metaphor. And if we show you the build steps, and Alex is going to talk about the ones specific to Redgate, yes, you'll see things like Android, Ant, CMake, Gradle, Gulp, Gradle and Gradle. We got Maven, right? And then you look at things, packaging, deployment, right? Azure PowerShell, Azure websites, utility functions to run command lines. Is that a penguin in there? I mean, seriously. So they really have got this new religion with cross-platform build agents, and what this means is that they made it really easy for Redgate to integrate their solutions.
Has anyone ever had to play with XAML templates in TFS?
Yeah, pretty horrible. I'll apologize on behalf of Microsoft.
Yeah,
we thought it was a good idea. Unfortunately, there was just some happy weed up in Redmond at one point, and they thought that was a good idea.
The reason I love this is it is mind-numbingly simple to create an automated task. I mean, the core value that our CI server is providing for us is carrying out some task on some schedule, okay? And rather than having to use some horrible scripting language where you end up writing scripts that are 600 lines long and just kind of indenting, it's horrible. We can now just drag and drop the build steps. And these are source controlled, right? Or?
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. Check this out. Now you get to know why and when someone made a change to your build definition.
So we're not just tracking the changes of our code, we're tracking the changes of the way that we build our code. That's amazing.
And if I come over here, take these two, yes, I get inline diffing right in the browser to tell me what changed between the build. And notice the arguments being highlighted is some of the magic juju that you're going to use to call the Renegade tools that you want to talk about. I think you even have a notepad file, so we just break those down.
Yeah, I do. There are a number of different ways I can show you our integration with TFS, and I want to show you the most raw version of this. So what Redgate SQL CI is, in its rawest form, is a command line tool. This is what I mentioned before. When people 2 or 3 years ago were trying to do continuous integration with Redgate, they would create these massive long build scripts that they had to maintain themselves. It was really difficult, it was really hard to do. People would spend weeks trying to set up a continuous integration process. We thought that wasn't good enough. So what we did is we created these commands. This SQL CI command line tool, which you'll see I'm referencing with just a few commands, is carrying out various tasks. And I'm going to show you, because it's actually easier to read the
command line.
The command line, if I just show it like this, let's zoom out a bit. The first command, SQL CI build, with a bunch of different parameters, one single line of code is going to take a version of my source code, create a database for it, build my database, build from my source code in that location, and that's going to find out, is the syntax right? You know what, we're now using Git right, we're branching, we're merging. Who's forgotten to take that comma when we did that inline merge with kdiff or beyond compare or something? Lots of us, right? It's very easy to make a syntax error when you're not working in a development IDE, when you're just merging code. So this is going to, if you have got yourself with a syntax error in your source code, this is going to find it, because it's going to say, I want to build this database now. Oh wait, I can't. SQL Server's complaining. The other thing it's going to do really, really well is handling dependencies. That's one of the most difficult things in SQL Server, right, is handling dependencies. And if you have built the table, built the view, depending on the table, renamed the table, or I don't know. If you've got yourself into a situation where you have broken a dependency, which is actually really, really easy to do in Management Studio if you're not careful, this is going to tell you, because it's going to try and build the database, and it's going to get confused, and it's going to throw an error. Okay, so that's what the build task is doing. Can we get this
running, and we'll talk about the rest of the pipeline?
Yeah, sure. It's actually already been running.
Oh, did you turn on continuous integration?
I did turn on continuous integration. It's automatically triggering. The test step does something very... and the last thing that the build step does is it creates a NuGet package. We have a package now that we can use for our deployments. We have a deployment artifact that we can move around that has a particular version number that traces back to source control to my work items, so I know exactly what changes have been made here, why they've been made, and I have an artifact I can move around and deploy in a reliable fashion to my various different environments. So this is giving me the foundation that I need to build an automated release process.
So I'm not going to just be zipping up these change scripts and emailing them to people to
Oh, no. Email is not a deployment tool, people. Okay? How many people use email as a deployment tool? Be honest.
Yeah, you have.
A few hands, yeah.
If you're not raising your hand, you've done it at some point, right? You send it on a Word doc, right? And a zip full of scripts, right? Yeah, do this, right?
Okay. So we've just got a few examples here. The last thing is actually taking that NuGet package, and it's calling Octopus Deploy and saying, right, Octopus Deploy, go and do a thing with this now. But actually, what I want to show you is while we have these command lines, you might not end up using them. And the reason you might not end up using them is we've been talking a lot about how we plug into other systems. We've got a couple of plugins. You can see here the VSO build 2015 version with special Redgate steps. You can also see we have a plugin to Visual Studio. So if you are still using TFS 2013 and you have to create those massive long XAML files, and the only thing you can really do is call MS build on something, which means you need to build a C# project to do your database deployment, to call a command line. It's just messy. So what we've done, sorry, Brian. So what we've done is we've created a plugin to Visual Studio that basically creates that for you. All you need to do is set your options. I want to run a build step. I want to run a test step. I want to run a sync step. And it's very easy to do.
Right. And the way he's doing it today, right, just speaks to the fact that even if you're not using TFS, you're using something else, if you can call a command line, you can integrate these into your pipeline the way you want to.
Yeah. So you know what? You can use Windows Scheduler if you want to, but why wouldn't you use one of the tools that's included in your MSDN subscription, or one of the open source or other third-party vendor tools that are out there? We have plugins for TeamCity, which is actually the CI server we use at Redgate, and the one you saw in the demo this morning, which is just a nice GUI built on top of that command line. We have one for Bamboo, Atlassian's Bamboo, which is who uses Jira for issue tracking. Here's a CI server that integrates really neatly with Jira, so you can actually track your work items all the way through there. And also this handles deployments for you as well. You've got Jenkins. It's probably the most widely used CI server in the world, especially if you talk to anybody that's not on the Microsoft stack, they're using Jenkins. It's open source, it's free, you can download it and use it in a day. So there are all sorts of automation tools out there. Redgate plugs into whatever you're using. And you know what? If we don't have a plugin for it, it's just a command line. That's fairly easy to automate. Yeah, so let's talk now about how the deployment happened in Octopus Deploy and the result of actually doing the deployment that happened. So first of all, let's go and look at our integration environment. Let's refresh it, because my changes were automatically deployed to this environment. Let me just log in. Whoa.
Might have changed.
That's not you. That's one of my colleagues, Andrew. So I've got the wrong picture, right? I've implemented the change to add the blog post, but I've not implemented the picture that goes with that. So to do that, I just need to open up Visual Studio. I've got the picture already here.
Did you use my thoughtful professional one, or using my special likeness?
I'm obviously using the more fun one. So let's drag that through, put that into the solution. Let's right-click.
Check in.
Check in.
Because we're using TFVC. There you go.
Yep.
Save it.
Yep.
Hey, we need a work item.
Let's go, we do need a work
click
item.
home. My work. There we go. All right. Update
Number 3.
Right-click, add to in progress, or drag and drop, whatever works for you. Fantastic. I feel much better. You're just bringing joy to my life.
And now we need to check that in. Add a comment. Adding Brian's pretty face.
You don't need the hash in here.
Yep, that was a mistake.
There we go. Perfect. Check in.
And now, once again, that's running in TFS. And I'm just going to give another feature I love about the new TFS. If we go to builds, we go to the queued build. This is the one that's already triggered. This here, once it uploads, is a live build log. This is something that you didn't have in TFS. You had it in Jenkins, you had it in TeamCity. You now have it in TFS as well. I'm not going to wait for it to actually render though. I'm going to show you that the deployment has been triggered in Octopus Deploy. This time it's got the new version of the picture. And once that has finished, I'll be able to go to the integration environment.
And we'll see that update.
We'll see that update. We'll see that update. Yes, so that's how the that's us plugging TFS through to Octopus Deploy. But now we need to talk about how the deployment is actually happening.
Right, so when we show them how you create this pipeline, because I think that's one of the critical aspects, what's happening here is we've now given it to Octopus Deploy, and this is where we have that control to decide how continuous we're going to be in our deployment. Is it going to be straight through to production, or do we want a chance to validate? We want to look at environments and do things like that. You have full control with the pipeline in Octopus Deploy. You do.
So here's a process. And this looks a bit similar to what we had in TFS, right? We've got a bunch of steps that happen one after the next and after the next. Now, the tool Redgate SQL Release is a PowerShell commandlet library. So it's just another easy to automate interface between some automation scheduling tool and the Redgate technology under the hood. We also have some plugins for Octopus Deploy. I'm not going to crack open the PowerShell and try and explain how every little bit of PowerShell works because I just don't think we have the time to do that. But what I will show you is we've just got these plugins into Octopus Deploy that sit on top of this PowerShell, which you can schedule from whatever automation tool you like, that allows you to say which NuGet package you got from TeamCity, where you want to deploy it, and how you want to deploy it. But to explain,
or team build too.
Or team build, or
TeamCity.
Yes, or team build, which is what we're actually using. But to explain how it's actually going to do that deployment, rather than showing you the code, I'm just going to show you some slides to explain what's actually happening. When we are putting together an automated deployment process for a database, a lot of people like to move declaratively. They like to say, this is the state I want to deploy, and I'm going to magic up the scripted deployment time to make it look like that. Make it so. That's kind of the way that SSDT and Microsoft encourage you to go. It's also the way that Redgate SQL Source Control encourages you to go. The other way to think about it is I'm going to write all of my upgrade scripts, and I'm going to have a process to run them in sequence. This is really nice. I can code exactly how I want my deployment to happen, and I know it's going to happen exactly the same way every single time. It doesn't scale very well, but it does bring various benefits. What we're going to do with SQL Release is we're going to try and get the best of both worlds. Okay? So our deployment artifact isn't just an upgrade script. It's not just a snapshot of how we want it to look. It's much more sophisticated than that. We have a snapshot of what we want to deploy, and this is generated from the NuGet package we're deploying. We have a snapshot of the target database, what we're expecting the start state to be. We have an upgrade script. This upgrade script is to go designed to deploy one particular state to the other particular state. Okay? If my production environment is not in the expected state, this upgrade script probably isn't going to work. It's not going to have the desired outcome. We also have some human-readable reports. We have a diff report in a nice, easy-to-read diff format. You may have seen this in the keynote as well. And we also have some warnings. You know what? If we're going to drop a table, it's probably nice of us to tell you before we go and do that, right? The way that the deployment actually gets executed, this is the computer part, the way that we execute the deployment. First of all, we check, is the target database in the correct state? We're going to double check that before we do anything. The next thing we're going to do is run the script, okay? We're not going to magic up a script and guess and hope that it's right and then execute it on production without giving you a chance to intervene. We're going to create the upgrade script in advance, and then when we later choose to do the deployment, all we're going to do is run that precise script, and that's the only script that we're going to run, okay? It's all wrapped within a transaction, so if any part of it fails, it gets rolled back. It's a SQL compare script, okay? And then we check afterwards, did the deployment actually work? Has someone come along and tampered with the script in the meantime? We're putting all of these checks in place, okay? And that means that we've got a really reliable process for deploying stuff, but we've also got these artifacts in here that are make it easy to review the changes. So as a DBA, I can see what's changing, how are you changing it, is there anything I should be aware of? You've also got like a deployment history in your deployment tool of choice, whether it's Octopus Deploy or Microsoft Release Management or VSO or whatever you're using. And we've also got in here all the information we need to make sure that we get upgraded using a testable script that we can test in a different production-like environment, and we know that we've got to the right state. And you know what? If we're not in the right state to begin with, we're not even going to execute it. So SQL Release is the complete tool to automate your deployments in a way that a DBA can be happy with. If your DBA understands what's happening, I'm hoping they're going to say, you know what? They're the checks that I would have done manually. And you know what? When I'm in a rush, I miss some of those out. So,
how's our release doing?
How is our release doing? Let's go back and take a look. So let's go back to the dashboard. So the deploy to integration is finished. So if I refresh integration,
please,
we should see now we've got Brian's face with Brian's blog post. So now I want to deploy this to my test environment. Okay, I want to deploy application code and database code hand in hand. Well, Octopus Deploy natively is really good at deploying web apps. We'd already got that set up. Within the same project, we're deploying the database, we're creating the release and deploying it, and I can trigger it in a few clicks, just like we did earlier today. So I'm going to promote that to the test environment. Okay. While I'm doing that, I want to show you another tool. And I'm not going to talk about DLM Dashboard in a huge amount of detail in this talk, but after lunch in this room, there's going to be another talk by a couple of my colleagues, David and Beth, and they're going to talk in a lot more detail about this DLM Dashboard tool. It's a really exciting tool. I know a lot of people are excited about it. A lot of people are already using it. It's free at the moment. There will probably be a paid version in the future. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like yet. We're still working it out. So not promising it's going to be free forever. But what this is going to do is it's going to spot in real time. First of all, this version number has come from TFS. It integrates with the SQL CI. One of the things you can do with SQL CI is say, by the way, DLM Dashboard, if you ever see a database that looks like this, the code that I'm testing right now, just so you know, it's version 57. That means that change, I know it has come from my CI server. It can recognize when that change has happened. If I come through and look at this change, I can see that this change happened. This is a change that happened. It happened this time by this user using this tool. This is the exact script they used. So we get all sorts of information there. If we had ended up in a state that it didn't recognize, it hasn't come through CI, I know that somebody has subverted the process. We get a different sort of warning. You can set up email alerts so that you know about it.
And what's great is when you take this hand in hand with your release tools like Octopus Deploy, notice that we made the choice when to promote. We said it was ready to go forward. Right? Some organizations will feel more comfortable to say, hey, automatically go into dev and test, but then in prod I want to pause, I want to look at things in detail. You have control with these tools, but the key is you're not behind the keyboard when it actually has to happen. You click the button, it starts, right? So you have this traceability, and you know that people haven't mucked with the scripts.
And what you'll see now is that the test environment has updated automatically, so it knows it's been deployed to test. I can go back to Octopus Deploy to see that that's happened successfully. And now I'm going to deploy to staging. And what I'm going to do when I deploy to staging, I've got an extra step in my process at this point. It's a manual intervention step. In between creating the release and deploying the release, I pause. I notify the DBA team or whoever it is that is supposed to review this deployment. And also all of those artifacts, you'll see them in a couple of moments appear in the top right corner. So it's going to pause. It's going to notify the DBA, look, it's time to review this deployment. And by the way, here's your diff report. Here's your upgrade script. These are your warnings. And down here, here's an audit trail to see that this has been deployed to all of these environments previously. You can also access a NuGet package. You can trace that right back to the code, the user that made the code change, and the work item that was implemented in the first place. So you know exactly why this change has been implemented, who did it, when they did it, and how they did it. We're just waiting for a moment for that release to be ready to review. Shouldn't take that long now, but when it does, I'll be able to show you those artifacts.
All right. Well, why don't we start wrapping up, because I hear lunch out there, and I know
me
that
too.
We could be eaten if we don't let them go.
Yeah, I'm down with that.
So I think a key point is you like what you saw, go play with it in the hands-on labs. All those different products we mentioned are available for you to get through with.
Yep.
And ultimately, if you have any more questions, you can get a hold of us on the internet. We'll be here the rest of the day. I'll be doing part of the panel later in the afternoon. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of SQL in the City.